On this April 1st Fool's Day. We got quite a crowd this morning for April 1st. I know some of the legislators said they were a little surprised that that many people in here, so you must have a lot of questions, and that's good. We want to thank our sponsors, the Ottawa Chamber Legislative Action Committee, Franklin County Farm Bureau, and American Legion Post 60. I also want to thank the Republican Central Committee for the refreshments back there. If you haven't tasted them, they're good. The City of Ottawa for providing these facilities, the coffee, and of course broadcasting this live on Channel 21, so watch what you say, watch what you do. It's being recorded live and then will be played back later throughout the week. If you have a cell phone, one of these little things, please turn it off. We don't want it ringing in the middle, if anything that's going on. So we please ask you to turn that off. Want to make one announcement. This coming Monday at 5:30 to 7 here at City Hall. A few weeks ago, we had what they call focus groups. I think some call it charades or whatever. That's a fancy name for focus groups. But we had about 150 people at two different meetings that provided their input on what they thought downtown Ottawa ought to look like. And so this coming Monday here at City Hall, the results of that report will be made known. So you're all welcome to attend that. Kathy here is going to be passing the mic around when there are questions. She is going to hold the mic. So please do not try and take it away from her, so we don't have to intervene on that. We ask that one question, no two-part questions, no statements. We keep it brief, and we want to get as many questions in as possible. Now, we do have some prepared questions. You have copies of those. You're free to ask whatever you want. I'll probably start out with the first question to get going. We want to get as many questions in, so as we give the legislators an opportunity to brief us on what has taken place so far in Topeka. Be thinking about questions. Think about something that's already not written down. We want to give everybody an opportunity to participate, ask questions, voice their concerns. And with that, I guess we'll start with the senior member, Senator Tyson.
Thank you. I guess I am the senior legislator in more ways than one. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. Happy April Fools. We're finished with session. April Fools. Just kidding. That would be awesome. But it's been an interesting few weeks. We've had major legislation before us, as usual. Tax, budget, school finance, Medicaid expansion, several topics that I know you'll have questions on today, and I look forward to your questions. So thank you for being here, and thank you to our sponsors.
Blaine?
Good morning, everybody. Always great to see a crowd. I was the one that mentioned I thought it was great we had this crowd here. I know if it was a little sunnier out, probably you'd be home mowing the yard. I know I need to do that. But I want to leave plenty of time for your questions today. It's been a busy month in the legislature. We kind of complained last month that some of the big pieces hadn't been moving, and wouldn't you know it, as we got closer to first adjournment, the pieces have started to move. So thank you all for coming out, being a part of the process. Absolutely appreciate you being here and looking forward to visiting with you this morning on whatever's on your mind.
Good to see everybody this morning, and thank you to the sponsors. I did want to mention, and it has been a very busy month. I'm on the K-12 budget committee, which even on Thursday we worked almost until 10 o'clock at night, working on the school finance formula, so I look forward to questions on that. But I did want to mention one thing and thank a group. I had gone to a meeting for the Kansas Livestock Association a couple weeks ago, and this morning as I was driving in, I saw another big trailer pulling out full of bales of hay, and we all know where it's heading, down to the headed west for the wildfires and for that relief and what was going on there. And I just wanted to mention that group because I know they did an auction and sent all that money for relief. And we all know that It's not a whole lot, but it's a lot for some of us, and I know that all those sacrifices just kind of go, many times they go unseen, and I know people in here and groups in here also have probably given to that effort too, but just wanted to mention that because we're kind of set apart a little ways from the wildfires, but fantastic, and it just goes to show the hearts of Kansans, hearts of the people in our area. So that being said, look forward to the questions today.
Okay, excuse me, we'll start in with some questions. I'll ask the first one here, and that's question number 4. And the legislators have had these questions ahead of time, so they've had it. You didn't get them? Wow, April Fools.
I think it's
All right.
you don't look at them. Yeah.
Okay, you can handle it. First question is, expansion of Medicaid is something which could be virtually important to our rural Franklin County community health care providers. It could potentially have a very positive financial effect for organizations such as Ransom Memorial Hospital, COF Services, and the Elizabeth Layton Center for Hope and Guidance. CanCare has passed both houses. You all voted against it, and now the governor has vetoed it. Please explain your vote and your views on this bill. Will you support an override of the governor's veto of legislation? Why don't we start with Senator Tyson?
Well, we did have a good debate on it this week. For the first time during session in my Senate career, I missed a roll call vote. I did not miss final action, but I missed roll call on the debate Monday afternoon on the CanCare expansion. I had a funeral that I had to, well, I didn't have to, you always have a choice, but I did make the funeral a priority to attend. It was a very difficult decision, but a friend of mine, Senator, ran one of the amendments that I had tried to get passed on CanCare Medicaid expansion, and what it would have done was a priority for Kansans with mental health, alcohol, drug abuse, and disabilities, that they would be priority in the system. We were not able to get that amendment on. I've said all along that we need a Kansas solution, not a blanket Obamacare solution, and we were not able to make any changes to that legislation. So it passed as is, as a blanket expense to the state with approximately an $81 million fiscal note from the state general fund. Well, as you've heard us talk before, that money just isn't to be found right now at the state level. So with those factors in place, I voted no on the legislation.
Kevin?
Thank you for the question. I'll start with, will you support an override of the governor's veto of legislation? No. And I don't take the question lightly. If this is halfway in, halfway out when it comes to our health care. It really depends on what you want. If you want government health care, federal level, all the way down, jump in. If you don't want it, I say let's move towards a free market. That's what I would say.
I want it. We do. Yeah.
So that being said, I had. It's okay. I had TRICARE when I was in the military. That's more of a government health care. I went in to get, I went in to start looking at a eye surgery and also get a tooth implant. They look at our MOS, they look at what we do, and they give us priority or not. I moved in front of a line of 200 to get eye surgery. I moved in front of a line of 200 to get a tooth surgery because I'm special ops. I don't know. We can look at it a couple different ways, but I know people have been waiting for 3 years to get their tooth surgery, and I got it in a few weeks to a month. Government health care is something that we're kind of halfway in, halfway out. I mean, we can, when it comes to Medicaid expansion and doing it at the local level, there's a lot of goods that can come from it, and there's a lot of bads that can come from it. Depends on if you trust our federal level or not. The same question could be asked, do we have, at the federal level, are we going to have a balanced budget amendment? Because we can't just continue to spend like we have money coming out our ears. But we do. And so 90% comes back from the federal level. And that's what many people will say is the good thing about this. There's no promises there, and over time, it could come back on us to the tune of $500 million a year. And so when we say it's too expensive, like I have a list of other states, all the other states who said it will cost this much in the first year, this much in the second year, this much in the third year. And it's exponential. It's 110%. It's 200%, 250% beyond that. And so right now, we just passed, and I'm getting into a lot of other questions, but we just passed out of the House, the Kansas House Budget Committee, a negative $248 million for 18, negative $276 million budget for 2019. That's just out of the House. We'll see where it goes from there. Then I'm sitting on K through 12 budget, and we're trying to keep it below $200 million. So that's for 19 and beyond. So we're looking at $400 million. We're talking, that's not even doing the CAPERS payments for 17 and 18. So that's just that. We've got so many other things that we've got responsibility to pay for. And that's the main thing that the legislature does, is we come up with how much it's going to cost, budget, and try and keep it within a certain amount. And that's what we're doing. So we don't even have a tax policy yet put forward or anything like that. So it's very expensive, but it's not a light question. And so I appreciate the passion and emotion, and I do see that, and I understand it right now.
I apologize up front because this is going to be a somewhat lengthy answer. I usually try to keep these pretty succinct, but this is a big issue, and it deserves serious consideration. And I want you all to know what my thought process has been, and I want to thank all of you who have reached out to me to let me know what your thoughts are on this issue. I've heard from many of you in the room and many of our constituents, and your opinions do matter. And even when we disagree, it's important that we do so respectfully and with honor, and have a conversation that hopefully leads to better understanding. There is a lot of emotion around this topic. The other day when we sat on the House floor for about an hour debating the veto override, we had legislators in tears. We had legislators who got angry. I've heard from citizens who have both of those things, and quite frankly, there's a lot of emotion in this topic for me as well. This is not the place that I would like to find us or our state at this moment. It has been said that this is an issue about the governor, and I would disagree with that. This is not an issue about the governor. When you all elected me 5 years ago, you sent me to Topeka to do what I thought was best for this district, to weigh each issue, to be as informed as I could be, and to make what I thought was the best decision to reflect our community values and who we were as people. I ticked some people off doing that, not the least of which is the guy that occupies the office on the second floor. When the phone rings at night, we're in the call of the House, and it's 2 in the morning, and he's lobbying people to support his tax policy, he doesn't call me because he knows what my answer is going to be. And when he has meetings in his office to twist arms and persuade people, I'm not invited. The only time I've been in Sam Brownback's office in the last 3 years is when we've had school students up there working as pages, because tradition and custom dictates that they go in and get a picture with the governor if he's there. So this is not about the governor for me. This is about what is best for our district and what we can sustain at this point in time. When we talked a month ago about this issue, I told you there were 4 concerns that I had with House Bill 2044. I told you that I was concerned that it created disparate treatment under our social safety net, that we have people at COF that are disabled that cannot get services, they're on an HCBS waiting list, and that this would allow people who were otherwise able-bodied to obtain health care. And it will. The test for Medicaid expansion is, do you make between 100 and 133% of federal poverty level? And if you already have insurance, you have to give it up to take the Medicaid plan. I don't like that. I think that whatever solution we come up with should be fair, and it should be equitable to all of the parties involved. The second concern I gave you was uncertainty over what was happening in D.C. I think we can all agree that a month later it's settled down a little bit. We have somewhat of a clearer idea, I think, of what's happening there, and my concern on that front has lessened. Although you still have congressmen and women and the president talking about taking another run at health care at some point. And the good Lord only knows what we'll get out of D.C. on health care policy. My third concern was that we not make promises to the people in our district, particularly those who might be told that they would be covered, only to have the rug yanked out from underneath them. We don't have the means to pay for the state portion of this bill. We don't have it. And so if we tell people we will cover them, and then we can't afford to do so, we will have lied to them. That is unconscionable. I cannot do that. The fourth concern is the money. How do we pay for it? The estimates for this bill are $55 million on the low end. And if we miss the estimates on who will sign up for Medicaid expansion, as almost every other state has done, sometimes in a magnitude of 100 to 200%, we will end up spending $110 million to $150 million. And the federal government will continue to draw down their contributory share to 90-10 by 2020. We are $500 million in the hole next year. That's assuming we continue to defer CAPERS payments. That's assuming we continue to raid the highway fund. That's assuming that we continue to bond debt for state operations and ask our children and grandchildren to pay for them. I don't like any of that. I have voted against all of that consistently because I don't think it's what our district values. But I cannot, in good conscience, say let's add 50 to 100 million in new spending when we're 500 million in the hole. And 36 hours ago, the House K-12 Budget Committee said they want to put another 150 million into education, rising to 750 million a year by year 5. We don't have it. I am absolutely sympathetic to those working people who struggle to buy health insurance. And I believe that it is in the long-term best interest of our state to find a way to have more people covered and have more people get and access preventative care, because it makes good sense. Going to the doctor annually, getting checkups, good dental care, all help us save money in the long run. There are states who have done this in a slightly different way. Indiana and Michigan have used a Section 1115 waiver. The Healthy Indiana program is kind of held up as a model. They use health savings accounts instead of direct premiums. And everybody pays a little something. Not a lot. In Indiana, I think it's $27 a month. It wouldn't necessarily have to be that much in Kansas. Indiana also incentivizes healthy behaviors and preventative care. Many times people who are working a job or two and struggling to get by don't make time for themselves to get to the doctor. And Indiana incentivizes that and says if you do that, there are rewards built into the system. So we can change generations of bad health outcomes. I favor something like that. Let's take a look at that. That's not in this plan. That's not in this plan. I am sympathetic to our community mental health center, and I supported an amendment on a bill earlier this month that would give them $4 million, all the community mental health centers, the crisis centers, $4 million if we allowed the lottery to sell scratch-off tickets and vending machines. I would support an increase in the provider reimbursement rate. For those of you who know about Medicaid, you know that last year it was cut 4%. That's particularly insidious for people on Medicaid, because what we've told them is we'll cover you, but we won't pay enough reimbursement to the doctors and dentists and optometrists that you want to go to so that they'll actually see you, because they don't make enough on the reimbursement compared to private insurance reimbursement. That's wrong. And I've talked to the House Appropriations Chair, and we're going to run a bill on that next week, and I will support that bill. It is my fear that if we pass this legislation, if we override this veto at a time when we don't have the money, we will empower the governor, because he has allotment authority when the ending cash balance is under $100 million, and that authority increases if we go under zero for an ending cash balance. And we almost certainly will, given the other things that I've talked about today. We will enable him to make other cuts, perhaps cuts to reimbursement rates. So we will open the pool up and say, come in, we'll cover you, to the Medicaid expansion eligible population, and then we will cut the provider rates so no one will see them. And those who are already on Medicaid, because remember the program covers pregnant women and children up to 138% of poverty level already. No one loses coverage if this bill isn't passed. It's simply not an expansion. But we will tell those people who already are dependent on this coverage that you may get less access to health care because we don't have the money to pay our share. That's not right. That's not a community value that I think exists here. And I can't support that. And it breaks my heart because I don't want people in our district to go without health care. I don't want our community mental health center to struggle financially. And I don't want our hospital to miss out on Medicaid expansion dollars that could help them provide additional services to our community. But I also cannot support spending money we don't have, making promises we can't keep, and potentially hurting those who are already in the Medicaid system. So folks, I am sorry that some of you will be disappointed in my vote, and I am sorry that we may have a fair and honest disagreement on this point, but I simply cannot vote to override this veto at this time.
Thank you. Kathy, we'll now open it up for questions from the audience. I ask you to be brief and make sure it is a question and not a statement.
Since every issue that you are discussing now that is going to be further decimated is a result of the failed experiment by our governor, which was really the end of the power of state government by the death of 1,000 cuts. Since this happened because you've turned the spigot off of tax revenues, when can we expect the spigot to be turned back on? If people in this state don't matter, what are you doing?
I'll be glad to answer that. There's tax legislation that's been proposed by both chambers and being looked at by both chambers.
And what will our governor do?
The tax legislation that's being looked at has several different scenarios. One's a 3 bracket, one's 5 bracket, one's 1 bracket. There's extremely different scenarios. And what the nice thing about this, I mean, it's difficult that we're in this situation. We're not in this situation just because of the 2012 tax cuts to personal and business.
Let's try representatives or senators an opportunity to explain without the cat calls.
The reality is that there are several states in this situation. Oklahoma missed their revenue estimates by over $1 billion. It was $1.3 billion. If you look at the patterns for the other states too, oil and agriculture, oil and gas and agriculture are a big impact to the revenue estimates. Another issue was that the revenue estimating process hasn't been changed. So those things combined and a few other things have created this perfect storm. And this is where we're at. So we are doing our due diligence to look at income tax, the state income tax program, and the changes that need to be made. One of the programs, well, there's several that's been proposed, like I've said. The House did pass one out of committee that will come to the floor next week. The Senate anticipates passing at least 1, possibly 2 or 3 different tax options so that the Senate has discussion and can decide which way they want to go, what their platform is, if you would. And you know, it's a difficult time for everyone. And if you look, when I went door to door this summer, individuals, I would knock on their door, literally trying to decide whether they pay their property tax, buy food, or buy medicine. So every decision that we make impacts people's lives. And for us just to say that we want to take from those individuals to support other programs is very difficult, and we have to make sure that we take all of that under consideration. That is part of our job.
I will tell you that the governor's tax plan in 2012 passed before I was there. We've talked about the tax plan probably every legislative coffee I've been to since. We had a tax plan earlier this year that would have raised $590 million in revenue. Remember I told you we're 500 down next year, so it would have got us peaking over the edge of solvency. The governor vetoed that plan. I voted to override that veto because I didn't think we were going to get a better offer this session, and every tax plan that has been shown subsequently raises less revenue. So I'm proud that I stood against the governor on that vote and voted to override so that we could have some revenue to make some of the payments we need. So I don't think it's universal up there, Karen, that people are supporting the governor's tax policy. I know that for me, I want to see us fix this budget mess. I want us to have a structural fix, and I've said that all along, and my votes reflect that.
I'll interject real quickly. Not one tax plan we have passed this year, not one, covers the costs that we have passed legislation for. Not even close. So that needs to be considered. We are passing legislation, especially on the House side, that cannot be paid for by any tax plan that has been considered at this point. So we need a reality check. What are our priorities as a state? What are our taxes are going to be raised this year.
On corporations?
Corporate tax has never been part of the discussion, but
If you have a question, we'll get to you. Allow them to speak.
the business tax is going back on. There is an attitude and an appetite to place the business tax back on, and that will mean sole proprietors, S corporations, and LLCs. There are also, when the 2012 tax cuts were enacted, most people do not realize the majority of those cuts were individual tax cuts. So we are looking at individual tax increases this year too. That is much consideration. Part of the heartburn over this is, when do they start? Do they start in fiscal year 2017, January 1st, 2017, or January 1st, 2018? So those are some of the dynamics that are trying to be decided. But there will be a tax bill this year.
Yeah, there will. And to kind of give maybe a little bit of, I don't even know, purview, on the budget committee, the House Budget Committee, the argument is not over raising taxes or not. The argument is over driving taxes or not. In other words, like I said, we passed out a negative $248 million for just 19 budget, and it goes up from there. When we first started, one of the things I asked, because this sets up your votes in committee, because the chair was going to assume a $300 million money to work with, $300 million budget, or on top of what we already have, $300 million. Something kind of like the tax policy that almost passed the legislature, only missed it by 3 votes on the override in the Senate. I think it was 3 votes. And that would have put us right around $300 million. So we began to have the discussion with $300 million. And then everybody said, whoa, 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 shouldn't we back off and go with the money we actually have, which at the time was negative 240, give or take, something like that, maybe a little bit more. And so we backed off and we started with a negative. And the question is, do you actually go off of what you actually have, or do you go off of what you could possibly have? Because we didn't have a tax plan. And so you're creating a budget off of thin air. As we began to start, we didn't have that clearly aligned in our minds, and so we added on capers, and we were at negative $600 million within 2 days. We had to be honest about what we can actually do in 18 and 19. If you're at a negative $600 million, that's before K through 12 finance, that's before everything. You're looking at $1.5–2 billion in a single year. So nothing. One of these questions was about state gasoline tax. Nothing would be off the table. Everything would be on the table because you have to get it from somewhere. And so that's when it comes to and just answering the state gasoline tax. I don't want to raise gas on or on a tax on gasoline. I can just, when I'm shopping, I can drive over to Missouri, and it's way cheaper. So nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to do another $1 on cigarette. Are you kidding me? Seriously, there is a good black market for cigarettes when you start doing that. I mean, but that being said, when you are getting your wish list and it's up to $1 billion, it's got to come from somewhere. And so, yeah, there's going to be a tax policy. And what the governor is going to do. That's really because it's another branch of government. Whoever's in that seat, they play a vital role. And we have to do something that can either pass muster with the veto or is going to get enough votes that can actually pass the rest of a veto override. That's what we're working
We have
on.
another question?
Karen, you said that you went door to door and you heard your constituents' concern about paying their medical bills or their taxes, and that you feel their concerns. Are you willing to give up your medical care or your retirement fund until such time that these issues are addressed?
I'm very glad that you asked that. I did give up my retirement fund when I took this job. There are different tiers that legislators can ask, and I've been asked this in every campaign that I've had, and for some reason my opponents don't understand. Legislators can select where they come in at capers at. They can select whether their capers is just based off their salary, which is minimal, $11,000 to $15,000, or their salary plus per diem and benefits. And the third tier is that combination of, or fourth tier, combination of times 365 days a year, which we know we're not in the legislature that many days. So it ups your pay and your capers benefits. I think there was an article in USA Today in 2012 about the Senate President, Steve Morris. I think his capers was based off of a $110,000 a year salary, which we know he wasn't making that. So when I signed up for capers as a legislator, I put the test that I put to everyone. Legislators should not have any other benefits than any citizen in the state of Kansas. None. So I took my capers based off of the 11 to 15,000, and I have a letter from the director of capers that will back this up. I did not take the benefits that were available to legislators, even though knowing that I took a pay cut with my job, which impacts my retirement, because I did choose to take this job. I took what I feel that all legislators should do, is to have the same benefits that any state employee would have. And so that's what I did as a legislator. Thank you for asking.
Medical insurance?
We do have medical insurance through the state, as any state employee does, and it's the same benefits that any state employee would have. Thank you for asking.
I think my question is maybe to you, Blaine, because I think last time you were discussing the budget that was vetoed and not overridden, that restored the 3 tax brackets, but it didn't restore them to what they had been previously. And I think I asked you, and you were still talking about the deficits, that still wasn't enough money, and I said, so does that mean you will restore the 3rd tax bracket? Because it's the one you mentioned was only at a fraction of what it had been.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me you still have the same problem. You need to restore that revenue. Why is that not on the table? Particularly to the higher earners.
Sure. The bill that was vetoed did create a 3rd bracket.
But not
It-
to what extent.
Right, it had a lower rate than what it had been previously.
Right, so.
And we
why-
could, and that bill did not pass, and the override did not happen in the Senate. They were 3 votes short.
Right. and
I
so-
did vote to override the veto on that.
Right, But my follow-up question to you then was, so now are you ready to restore that third tax voucher? You said it wasn't necessary.
No, I didn't say it wasn't necessary, Roxy. I said I'm not going to commit to a specific tax plan until I see all of the details of it. That's a difference. And I'm not prepared to do that today until we see it. But I'll tell you that if that plan that raised $590 million did not pass one chamber, I'm not sure why one that raises more is going to be more likely to pass. It's not that the chamber looked at the Senate looked at it and said, boy, this doesn't raise enough revenue. We'd like to have more taxes raised in this plan. That's not what they said. That's not why it went down in the Senate. So ultimately, politics is the art of the possible. What can actually be passed by both houses and in this case, override a governor's veto. So we need to see the details of that plan, and we need to consider all of them thoughtfully. And I'll just tell you that every plan since has raised less revenue than that $590 million plan. That's why I voted for the override, because I figured that may be the last train leaving the station that had any hope of getting us to solvency.
So at what point, there's an elephant in the room, at what point, at least a couple of you helped create this hole? At what point, the Kansas is in a hole. And the regular people out here are the ones who suffer the hole. The part that's no job creation that was promised with all of this cutting taxes, people having part-time jobs, no benefits, which is why you need the Medicaid expansion. So it's the people out here paying the price for the experiment. So when does the experiment end?
This year, the income tax will go back on small businesses. If we don't do anything else with the tax code, that will happen. As I said before, we are at 1981 prices for agriculture. 1981 prices. But our production prices aren't at 1981 prices. So I don't see how anyone can not understand that there's more things involved than just the state income tax portion of this. There's also been a decrease in revenues to the state as a result of agriculture and oil prices. So we need to look at the stability of our tax code and our tax philosophy, and that's what we've been studying in the Senate, is where do we want to land with our tax philosophy? We've looked at all taxes. We've looked at the tobacco, the cigarette, the fuel tax. We've looked at property tax. We've looked at retirement packages that aren't being taxed possibly. We've looked at income tax, sales tax. Everything's on the table. Sales tax exemptions. One of the things that did come up in committee, we have a bill that we pass every 2 years for K through 12. It requires 20 mil on your property tax to go for the local schools. It goes into the state, so the state gets credit, and then it's sent back to the schools. The interesting thing about that 20 mil is it can be abated. It can be abated by local and city governments and other governments. Most legislators on the committee weren't even aware of that. So we have asked Revenue to give us that number to see how much of that 20 mil is being abated, because that is money that the schools could have. So we have to decide as a state, are these business incentives, the tax abatements that are occurring, the priority, or is the priority to get the 20 mil to the school? And that's a discussion that we are having in the Senate Tax Committee at this minute. Or not this minute, but this year, this session.
Other question?
I just wondered, Representative Jones and Senator Tyson, how you voted in the override on the tax bill.
I voted to not override the veto on the tax.
Yes, I voted to sustain the veto.
School funding is looking promising. It's looking promising. They're talking about Monday, more amendments being added possibly to school funding. Two questions. Sorry, Richard, but I have two. One of them is, why isn't career and tech ed being funded if Kansas wants to improve job opportunities in the state? Why aren't you funding career and tech ed, which is a big portion of a lot of school districts' curriculum now? And my second question is, considering all these tax talks, how are you going to fund it? And are you going to fund it to the extent that the Supreme Court will say, yes, you're funding it enough?
I can answer that to the best of my ability. Yeah, because we're talking about Monday now. We'll see. I agree with you on tech ed. Super important. I came down the Ransom Memorial my senior year, and that's what I mean. I did the health careers, BOTEC at that time. Certainly, and that followed me all the way even until my military career. I used that. So certainly important, certainly, and it hurt some of our schools too. We had a testimony from Brian down from Central Heights that came up, and he was probably the main one who talked about that. It was really good too. Yeah, we're losing on that. In the chairman's bill, if you will, I believe, and the chairman's bill doesn't look like the chairman's bill anymore at this point. So, like you said, it's certainly getting better. But I think it could be put that back on, at least to a degree, on Monday. But also, this is fluid. This hasn't passed out of the House K-12 Budget Committee yet. So strap in for a whole lot of changes. It's not solidified yet, and so I don't want to get hopes up on anything that is in that bill yet. I don't know how it's gonna look. That being said, on funding it, that's the hardest part. Is we're trying to. This should have been had 2 years ago. This is many of us, if not, were saying we need to deal with this. Why it was pushed off, not sure. Why it was pushed off until this year, not sure. But I do know this, without a doubt, that it's been worked. That it's been worked and worked this year, and I think that everybody's getting their voice heard. If not, call and come up, and that's really what it comes down to. Is we're trying to get all the voices heard and everything, but when it comes to funding, that is the elephant in the room when we're dealing with budget and stuff like that, is just how much it's going to cost us. So they've tried to keep it around 158, 160 million, and that's been the push. There's been on both sides. There even Thursday night, one of the things they were trying to do was make a concession on. And I disagree with it, but on our virtual schools, let's not fund that anymore, or let's ratchet it down, because the way all the votes were going, they were the ones who were like, we feel kind of bad. Let's take money from tech or from the virtual schools, and so we had that argument on virtual schools. Where it lands, I don't know, but there is an effort to keep it around 160 million, but we'll see. And I don't know if that's enough or not for the courts.
I would, if you want others, like Representative Jones is on the K-12 Budget Committee, and he's the only one here who is on that committee, so I can't speak to a lot other than to say that I was in the building late that night working on some Judiciary Committee stuff, and I know that they were definitely working hard and long hours to consider a lot of amendments. The Gannon decision is interesting because it doesn't set out a dollar figure. It doesn't say if you fund this much, then you'll be funding adequately. And you'll recall that the last time they did that was the Montoy decision, and they included a dollar figure, and that really incensed a lot of people that it appeared the court was trying to tell the legislature how it had to use its power of the purse. So many of us were happy that the court didn't set a number. The problem is that the court didn't set a number. And so it's kind of a target and you don't know what it is. I'm in the camp that thinks that probably something in the neighborhood of $200 to $300 million would probably get us there if it's allocated across a formula correctly. And that the court said focus on these at-risk students in these 6 categories whose outcomes are not meeting what we value in terms of outcomes for our state school children. I think the $750 million that some on the committee want to do is more than we need, and I'm not saying more than we need to satisfy the court to find adequacy, and that's then a question, as the court said, for the citizens of this state. Is that what you want your school system to be funded at? That's a conversation to have. But I think we need to get somewhere in that 200 to 300 range. I think would probably get us to adequate funding if it's done correctly. I can tell you that some of the people I've talked to on that committee are trying to move what was the chairman's bill back towards the old formula. And what's funny is they're kind of on both sides of the ideological spectrum. It seems like folks have kind of realized that as cumbersome and complicated as the old formula was, it was the last thing we knew was constitutional. The court had basically signed off on that formula in the Montoy case. So I think there's some effort to move back there. You asked specifically about C-Tech education, and my understanding is that there's been some conversation on the committee about not having it as a separate weighting, but thinking that every student needs to have access to it, so including it in the base instead. And I don't know if that's happened yet or not. That was the last conversation I'd had with anybody about that pot of money and the funding on that. So, thoughts from the Judiciary Committee on school finance. There you go.
So I was very glad and proud to vote for that original legislation that, the governor does get beat up on a lot of stuff, and I don't agree with him on things, but this was one of the good things that he did. He started the career technical ed, allowing high school students to take technical courses so that they could graduate certified in a program. It was a win for our technical schools, it was a win for the high schools, and definitely a win for the student. I've talked to so many students that have come out with welding certificates. There's some that are getting cosmetology certificates, just, other things, because not everybody's wired to go to college or wants to go to college. So it was a great program, and I hope that we continue to fund it and continue to support programs of this nature. There's a gentleman down in La Harpe, Kansas, that took it on himself once this program got implemented. He donated $1 million building to start a technical program down in La Harpe, Kansas, so that carpenters and different technical programs could occur within that area, and high school students could drive. And they're welcome to drive down there from this area too to participate in the programs. But it's very innovative what a private citizen did to help our education and to help our students. So I just wanted to mention that. He probably doesn't get enough kudos when somebody's willing to step up to the plate in that degree. It's very impressive, and it shows you that Kansans do care and that we do try to support, and we know that education is such a critical part of our state, and there's different ways of educating people. Some may be in the classroom, and some may be actual doing the activity. Different people learn different ways, and we need to realize that as we address our school finance as to how we're addressing each student's needs.
Dennis George, I've been in healthcare since 1983. Would just like to talk a little bit, just one more follow-up on the question of sound bites. In Kansas, we have been at cutting edge when we privatized Medicaid through our managed care through 3 competitive bids to the CanCare program. Have we had bumps in the road? Yes. Has our healthcare providers taken substantial cuts, both on the state level with the allotment of 4%, as well on the federal level? As we all evolve, we all like our programs at times, but we want to be here in the long term. As we look at the ACA, and again, I call it the ACA because, again, several items in the ACA were Republican ideas back in the 70s and 80s and in the early 90s. So as I look at moving forward, with the ACA still being law until our congressmen and women and our senators, men and women in Washington, can come to a compromise, which is a very lost art in this day. Sorry. I'm too tall. I have to sit down.
She won't give it to you?
So I'll sit down, I'm tall enough, you can see my head. So, but as we move forward, we have to look at compromise. As Kansas being a cutting-edge organization with managed care for several years under a privatized position, we need to look at how do we bring the federal dollars back to us. As we look at our soundbite of $81 million in costs, there's also savings and other revenues brought back to the state. There are revenues for reduction in the medical needs spend, the SSI, pregnant women, but we also get increases in the rebates for the program of drug rebates back to the state, plus our new revenues coming in. So as we look at this, please keep in mind this is a Kansas solution. It's not just sound bites. There's other revenues that offset. As a professional since 1983, believe this is not a budget negative. This is a budget positive. And we look at our hospitals, and I'll just use the hospital and economic impact of Franklin County, Allen County, and Anderson County. At Ransom Memorial, if we would do a change of expanding Medicaid, uncompensated care would drop from $4.3 million to $2.85 million. The net impact for revenues without expansion, Ransom Memorial, which I started there in 1985, is down $1.6 million. With the expansion, they would receive an economic benefit of $994,000. And we look at Anderson County, it's the same. They're without expansion, they're in the hole $366. With expansion, Anderson County, our friends from the south, would receive $1.6 million, as well as with that's Allen County. With Anderson County, they're down $184. If we would have expansion, they would be receiving an additional $1.15. Our leaders in our healthcare organizations do a lot to serve all of our community. And we can talk whether people get services now or not. I'm one to believe that we reach out as healthcare providers, and we still serve all now. It's a question of equitable funding. As we want to bring the dollars that leave Kansas now to Washington, we want to bring them back. So please keep an open mind as we have a dialogue over this next period, that it's just not an 81. There are other items that will benefit our communities. As I travel across western Kansas, we're going to lose hospitals. Right now, there's 35 hospitals across Kansas. So please keep an open mind. At least look at the numbers. We have the debate. In the House, we need 3 new votes. On the Senate, I believe it's 2 or 3 to override. Please take a look at the numbers.
Blaine and Karen. Blaine, you said that the Medicaid expansion was not a question about Brownback. And Karen, you said that our shortfalls were partially to blame on the bottoming out of oil and agriculture. My question is, when did we begin to see the worst of our shortfalls, and does that align more with the bottoming out of agriculture and oil, or does it align more with the fiscal policy that has been promoted by Sam Brownback and the Koch brothers, who are looking to privatize everything?
What I said is that for me, the decision is not about the governor. Some of the emails that I've received and some of the debate surrounding Medicaid expansion is about we should do this to show the governor. We should do this because we need to send him a message. And I'm telling you that that's not the way I operate. That's not the way I make decisions in Topeka. I appreciate Dennis's comments because that is the kind of thoughtful debate we need to have. Those are the items that we should be discussing, not personalities. We should be talking about policy. There is no doubt that the tax plan of 2012 went too far, too fast. And even if you wanted to make Kansas a lower tax state, which has some benefits, doing so in that manner blew a hole in the state budget that we have not recovered from. Pile on to that you also have a depression in the ag sector. Pile on to that you've had low severance tax revenues, and you have a fiscal disaster. Add on to that the spending habits really haven't changed. Every year there are districts that send people to Topeka that say they're going to cut spending. They're going to cut spending. They haven't yet shown us where they can cut enough spending to make up for the difference caused by the 2012 tax plan and the loss of revenue from the agriculture and severance sectors. So all of those things together combine to put us where we're at. But there is no doubt that the lion's share is what happened from the 2012 tax plan. It's some estimates $700 million to $1 billion, of which about a third is the LLC pass-through income issue, and the other two-thirds is the movement on the rates, the collapsing of rates and moving rates down. So that's the reality, and that's the situation we find ourselves in. So that's what I meant, and hope that clarifies.
Yes, and it was partial, but if we look to the other states that are having trouble with the agriculture and the oil, they did not have a decrease in their revenue, or they did not make any changes to their tax code. So you can look at those parallels. If we look outside the state, we get better data as far as pointing to the causes of it. And it wasn't just one thing. I mean, in 2013, I fought diligently to not decrease the sales tax. We were at 6.3 at that point. And the House was adamant at going to 5.7 because some legislators had made a promise. I wasn't there when that was done. But I fought to keep it at 6.3 so that we would know where we were at and bring some stability to the budget. We weren't able to do that. We went to 6.15, I think it was, 6.125. And in the meantime, they also adjusted the brackets, as Representative Finch said. There were other changes made to the income tax at that point and in 14 too. So instead of just putting a freeze on everything, which I doubt if you remember, but in 2013, I said at least we can do is freeze the income tax brackets. Well, I was absolutely wrong, and I learned a lesson to never say that common sense will prevail in the least that we can do, because we didn't do it. And even though I fought for it, I mean, I'm one of the most conservative senators up there, and for me to say, let's not continue these cuts, that was a big red flag to some legislators, but not to a majority of them, so that we would stop the situation that we were in. And there was only 1 year on the revenues. I don't have those numbers with me, but there's a graph that I've sent out before, and it shows that we have increased spending. There was 1 year in the last 6 years, I think, that we've decreased spending or stayed neutral on spending. But every other year, we've increased spending. So the revenues did decrease, and we continued to increase spending. The first year, in 2012, when we cut the income tax, that budget was a $425 million increase over the previous year's spending. You know, you can't spend like that and continue to dig yourself in deeper, not knowing where your stability is. Shouldn't have cut
the taxes. That's what I was going to make a comment, is that I'm hearing from you guys that we can't continue to spend. Okay, I understand where you're coming from, but I also hear you saying we don't have any chance of doing a higher revenue, more taxes. One of them's got to go. Why not raise the taxes? Why not fight to get those taxes up? I'll bet just about everybody in this room would be willing to pay more in taxes to see our problem solved.
I'll tell you, you can write a larger check to the state. I checked with the Department of Revenue. If anybody wants to write a larger check to the state, you can volunteer it. But there will be a tax increase this year. It's just a matter of where and how far we go with it, and the philosophy in the tax code. We really need to get that right. We don't want to be back here next year. So there's where the due diligence comes in. We're trying not to be back here next year. I don't know if we try to rush something through. Actually, I see us setting ourselves up on the spending side as we did in 2012 on the cut side. I see us in the cut side on 2012, the Senate Christmas treed up the legislation. They put every tax cut and everything they wanted to see in it in the bill. The Senate put it in the bill. I was in the House, and what happened was politics, I guess, is the interesting thing. that the House took the Senate position as is without amendment. That's the gist of what happened that year. I see us lining up for that on the spending side again this year if we're not careful. The House has passed some legislation that many people would like to vote for that we don't have, and the Senate has passed some legislation that we can't afford at this point. But if we keep passing legislation that we don't have the money to pay for, we are setting ourselves up for even more detriment.
And just to
Let him, go ahead and finish up.
what I was gonna say on your particular question about the revenue, I think the real question that it comes back to that the senator mentioned earlier is when you put forward tax policy, the question is when you start it, and when we vote to tax us 3 months ago or 4 months ago, that makes it less tasteful, and that could very well have been the votes. But I do understand. I said that's essentially the question that came back to on that one. But when it comes to revenue, that's the question: when. If we did it 2 years ago, it wouldn't be as big a deal. But when we're making votes to tax 3 months ago, that gets more difficult.
I'm sorry.
Let's have a wrap-up question here, 'cause it's getting late, we're past our time. Wrap-up question is, and we ask you to be brief, but concise as you can. Realizing this question is somewhat subjective and speculative, give your best description of how the remainder of the legislative session plays out. Should we expect a long and drawn-out adjournment, or do you have expectation of the legislators amenable formulating a plan for education and taxes and standing together to override potential executive branch vetoes?
Next week will be the tell. Next week, the legislation will be critical to see what comes out, and it'll give us an indicator of how long the veto session will be. So depending on what we can get passed next week, and then we have a break in April until May 1st, I think is when we go back. But next week will be the tell as to what type of legislation we're looking at this year and whether we'll have a long session or not. I do think there's an attitude. I've voted to override the governor on some things. It's not, as it's been said before, this isn't about the governor. This is about good policy and doing what's right for our constituents. So thank you again for being here.
Excuse me, Representative Jones.
Yeah, I agree. It's not about the governor, but the current governor that's in the seat still plays a role. We have to consider that when we put forward legislation, or it's just going to be veto after veto. Now, that being said, we only needed 3 more votes to pass that last tax policy, which did have retroactivity on it. So, that being said, I assume that whatever comes forward will be close to that on revenue or on tax policy. We're driving, though, with the K through 12 funding and all of that, we're driving what that amount will have to be. So, it's going to, I don't even know how else to say it. I feel like it's going to be, it'll all come together at one time. And I'd say to balance, but I don't know how it is. I don't know. If we pass a tax policy first, we're going to spend right to the point. If we pass our spending first, we're going to maybe tax to that point. But I'm not really sure where it's going to end up.
Every legislative session has a whole chicken and egg problem. Do you pass the budget first and figure out how much tax you have to raise, or do you pass the tax plan first and figure out how much you have to spend? And I don't think there's still a clear direction yet in this session how that will turn out. I and several other legislators have concerns that if we pass a budget without a tax plan, that you could see it not adequately funded, and we could be back to the governor making allotments again, and essentially ceding some of our legislative authority to the executive branch to make sure that the budget balances. So it will absolutely, as the senator said, be a question of what comes first and what happens in the coming week. I would anticipate that veto session will go longer than the amount of time that they have allotted for it. We still have 3 very large issues out there: tax, budget, and K through 12 spending, and the formula, and none of those at this moment seem like they are fully resolved or close. But every legislative session, we get sometime later in the session, and these issues start to come together. And this year, I look for that to happen, as has every other year in Kansas history, and we'll get to a resolution on those issues. My hope and my commitment to you is that I will continue to try to advocate for what I believe is in the best interest of the district and serve you to the best of my ability, and I thank you. I'm humbled by the opportunity to be your representative.
We thank you, Senator Tyson, Representative Jones, and Representative Finch. And we thank you, the
Yay.
Good. Continue to do so. Thank you.
FYI, we had over 100